you support us. That's how we expand and get the great guests, like my guest, Steve Pieczenik, that I bring on right now. Steve, there's all kinds of news that we can get into, but I want to ask you kind of a legal psychiatry type of question here.
No problem.
You've got psychiatrists that are going on CNN and MSNBC saying that, yes, it looks like Trump is unfit, he's mentally unfit, he can't do it. How are they legally getting away with that? Because you cannot legally diagnose someone without actually doing an examination. So how do they get away with this?
They can't. Basically, what I'd like to say is the following. I'm a board examiner. I was a board examiner for 10 years. Brenda Lee, who started this and said that Trump is not qualified, was trained at Yale, Divinity School, then at Harvard and MGH. She's not board certified as far as I know. That means I'm a board examiner. She came out of NIMH. I was offered the directorship of NIMH. So I would like to go into court if somebody is willing to fund me, the Alex Jones Show, or anybody else, and I would like to sue every one of the psychiatrists for malpractice, incompetency, and the fact that they violated what we call the Goldwater Rule, which is the American psychiatric rule saying that you cannot make any diagnosis of a person who you have not seen. From my perspective, I am the only psychiatrist who was trained both in psychiatry at Harvard, in political science or presidential politics at MIT, and served 5 different presidents, where I can literally tell you what their dynamic is, what their problem is, and the dynamics and problems of every president who I did not serve with because I taught at the War College. None of these psychiatrists are qualified, absolutely none of them, unless they work for the CIA or DIA. But none of them at this point are qualified. They should be sued. The book should be stopped because, number one, he has no idea what he's talking about. Number two, the gentleman is totally effete. Number three, he clearly is a manipulative, self-aggrandizing individual. Number four, since I'm in the novel writing business and people know my books, the Clancy franchise and others, I can say you can basically not buy the book and you can do a strike against the book. You don't have to throw it out. Just nobody buys it. You go online, nobody buys it. Whoever Anonymous is, they can mess up the system, and he doesn't get anything out of it. The reality is that this president of the United States is not sick. Quote, he is not crazy, emphatically, not mentally ill, with absolute clear determination from a board examiner. What he has is a personality which likes to play games, likes to manipulate, likes to have what he has. He likes to be what he wants to be. He can be grandiose. He can be self-aggrandizing. But the bottom line is he is not mentally ill. When you build building after building, when you've worked in New York and you build a fortune in billions of dollars, I would like to see one psychiatrist, just one, come up and tell me how many millions they have made on a business that they were never in and could create that business. There's not one psychiatrist I know. By the way, for 10 years, I board examined people exactly like those psychiatrists, and guess how many I flunked on a simple question of, tell me what you see about the patient. Just what they're doing right now. I flunked over 60% of all of them on a simple question. That means in my business, you cannot be board certified. Brenda Lee is not board certified. If she were board certified, I would have decommissioned her. She would have had a malpractice suit. By the way, this is the second time Yale Medical School has come forth with false psychiatric information. Owen, would you remember the first time? It's pushing you, but you weren't on the show yet. Would you remember anything about Yale Medical School? Does anybody remember that?
I'd be guessing it would probably be something on another conservative candidate for president, like a John McCain or something.
No, it's a good guess. It was Sandy Hook. When Yale Medical School came forth and they offered a psychiatrist who trained at Mass Mental Health, right behind me, he made up a total bullshit story, nonsensical, non-existent story about a guy who never existed, Adam Lanza. Plus, there was a psychiatric nurse who came from New Hampshire and did the same thing. So Yale Medical School has been in the business of falsifying information, making up stories, and at the same time being inappropriately medically professional. They're ineffective. And if I were head of HHS, the Human Services, I would stop funding Yale. If I were NIH, I would stop funding Yale, NIMH, and I would throw out the chairman of the department, the dean of the medical school, and I would throw out Brenda Lee. And if you don't do that, that's malpractice. Because at this particular point in time, I will remind every psychiatrist, thousands of you psychiatrists and analysts came out and said the same thing about Barry Goldwater because he seemed to be impulsive. He was talking about strategic warfare and bombing, and then you declared that he was crazy. You were wrong. You were wrong then. You're wrong now, and you're totally inappropriate. I wish Trump would file suit. I wish others would file suit. So each one of these psychiatrists would have a malpractice suit, plus we could make money on it. And that's the best way to make money on that. And it will teach all of these schools a lesson. Now, let me make another point clear. I went to Cornell University Medical College, which was an excellent school before. Who bought it out? Sandy Weil, a corrupt banker from Citibank who had to clean out his money through the Clinton administration and bought out a medical school. So it's no longer called Cornell University Medical College, which was famous. And he could never get in there because of his background and his religion. And guess what? Now it's called the Weil Medical School. Mount Sinai is called Icahn Medical School. And Los Angeles, it's called the Geffen Medical School. So the Jewish corrupt businessmen come into the medical schools and they buy out these medical schools with their names because they can't get in there. So now you got to understand that the sanctity of the medical school is not that great. And they should be evaluated and accordingly evaluated. NIH has to be reorganized. I know Tony Fauci. I have a great respect for Tony. Tony's been there too long. He was my resident when I was an intern at Cornell. He was a brilliant clinician. Now it's time that he leaves, departs, gets rid of his $300,000 salary, and cleans out NIH and IMH. It's time to clean them all out. That's what Trump has to do.
Well,
Other
Steve,
than that, doing fine.
Steve, to me, you just made headlines here. To me, you just made a news story. I don't know how this isn't a linked-on Drudge story right now. We should have a team of writers working on this. Steve Pieczenik says it's time to sue these psychiatrists that are saying Trump is mentally unfit, going on air and saying this. So, I mean, we got 30 seconds left. What do we do? I mean, how do we do this? If they need to be sued, what do we do?
Practice suit. You get a bunch of doctors, file a malpractice suit, get a bunch of the wealthy Republicans, and let's file a suit against each one of the medical schools that sponsor this, Brenda Lee and all the psychiatrists.
All right, so here we go. We've got bloggers, we've got tweeters, we got people who are listening. Get this out there. It's time to sue these psychiatrists. Let's make this trend. Let's get this in the headlines. Sue the psychiatrists, malpractice, saying Trump is mentally unfit. They are not at the appropriate grounds to make that statement. It's time for a malpractice suit. Okay, to me, Steve Pieczenik just made headlines, just made a story that ought to be written about 100 times before the day is over and then linked on Drudge. It's time to sue these psychiatrists for malpractice that are trying to diagnose President Trump without a proper examination. Now, Steve is the expert on this, so he knows what he's talking about. So here's what I'm saying, and I want to hear Steve's take on this. We've got a huge audience. If you are a blogger, if you are a writer, if you are a tweeter, if you are at INFOWARS and a writer on our team, work on a story. Let's force this out there. Let's make these psychiatrists feel the heat, so that more of them don't think about doing the same thing because of their political leanings. Just because you don't like Trump and you're a psychiatrist doesn't mean that you can misdiagnose him on television. No, that's illegal, so you're going to get sued for malpractice. So everyone needs to start writing that story. Everybody needs to start tweeting that. Let's make that mainstream. Let's force this into the narrative so that they feel the heat. These people cannot just go out and break the law without getting some pushback. So, Steve, I think this is a great idea. I think you just created headlines. What do you think about my idea to just force this out there into the mainstream?
One of the things we should do as well is to ask the liberals to give us and the psychiatrists who think that they know Trump to tell me an evaluation of John F. Kennedy, where we've published a hell of a lot of material. And he came out of Cornell Medical School. He was treated there and became psychotic. Now, what does it mean when a liberal president like John F. Kennedy, who started more wars than any other president, was on steroids, amphetamine, vitamins, and was totally discombobulated when he was talking with Khrushchev. What does it mean that he started the wars in Vietnam and increased it? Let's go to LBJ, who was impulsive, narcissistic, grandiose, abusive, and had...
All right, hey, Steve, we lost you for about 10 seconds there. Start over what you were saying about the biography.
Democrats. Let's talk about John F. Kennedy with Addison's disease, the fact that he was on steroids, he was on amphetamines, he was totally inappropriate in his negotiations with Khrushchev, where we precipitated the Cuban Missile Crisis. LBJ, who was inappropriate, grandiose, abusive, sadistic, who then slept with his own biographer, Miss Goodwin. I'd like her to make a comment about how do you write a biography about a man who seduced you and you in turn seduced him. So let's get into all these issues. Why don't we talk about Reagan's health? Why don't we talk about several other presidents' health? It is not the first time that a book or elements of a book or anything was taken away from an individual. If you go back to FDR, you could not take a picture of FDR if he was in a wheelchair. And the Secret Service at that time was expropriating cameras and anything that showed that FDR was a cripple. So let's get back to a little bit of history here before we understand what we're talking about when we talk about Donald Trump. Let's talk about Nancy Reagan and her role in keeping Ronald Reagan stable and lucid, why James Baker was used as the intermediary and what we had to do at that various times and what dimension was involved. I don't hear anybody talking about that. I don't hear anybody talking about Bush Jr., who is not the brightest of all and started a war and created 9/11, but nobody says he's crazy. But you can be sane, lucid, create a war, kill 3,000 Americans, and then kill thousands of Iraqis, Iranians, and innocent citizens like Bush Jr. and Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, and yet be considered sane. Now, you tell me what's going on here.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like everything else that they're doing. It's clearly an attempt to remove Trump from office, to delegitimize him, to make him look bad. And if you want to look, I mean, my goodness, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine, I mean, you want to talk about mental problems. I mean, I'm not trying to give them a hard time. I mean, they genuinely probably have dementia.
Well, I don't want to get into Nancy Pelosi or Dianne Feinstein. I mean, that's a geriatric unit. That's up to them. Bernie Sanders and all of them could go to a geriatric unit. I'm not making any diagnosis. What I'm saying now is, if you're going to be a psychiatrist who wants to make a diagnosis about Trump, then I have the right as a board examiner who's been involved with 5 presidents and then some to be able to question you and cross-examine you on every president of the United States and whether he or she had mental illness. Why don't you tell me about Abraham Lincoln, manic depressive, Marfan syndrome? We don't hear about that. We hear about how great he was in the Republic, but we don't hear about his mental illness because none of these psychiatrists are qualified to say anything about anybody other than themselves or their patient, and maybe not even then, because most of them are not trained very well. And if I flunk 60% of every psychiatrist who was then going through the boards, and that was an average, then I can assure you I can flunk Brenda Lee. I would take away her money from NIH, NIMH. I would take away Yale. I would sue Yale. I would sue the chairman, the dean, and the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry. I'd sue her and every individual psychiatrist whose name is there, and you're going to watch them back off so fast because I'd be the first one to testify in court that they have absolutely no ability to make that diagnosis, except for 1 or 2 other psychiatrists who were literally trained by the CIA and other intelligence organizations to understand the profiles of individuals, including the presidents of the United States. There are almost none of these psychiatrists have been trained to do anything other than to do what they're doing, and they're not doing it very well. Most of them are beholden to big pharma. They don't know psychotherapy, and the psychoanalysts have no idea about what politics involves in terms of politics and psychiatry. There's a whole field called politics and personality that was ironically created at Yale by Howard Laswell, whom I met. I was trained by him, Lucian Pye, but there's not one psychiatrist there who's ever been trained by Lucian Pye, Dick Solomon, or went to the Rand Corporation. So I would be happy to go to court, sue every one of these people, and see what happens. That's your news story. But Owen, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of the INFOWARS unit. Because if it weren't for people like yourself, we wouldn't be able to get through. And this is why I'm proud to be on your show. And you know, it's very simple. Is it fake news and not news? No, it's called ignorance. If you don't know what you're talking about, you can shoot your mouth off, whether you're a psychiatrist, you're a politician, or you're an idiot writer, the way that gentleman is. He's an idiot writer for Holden Company. Holden Company will probably be sued. Whether there's fact in there.
Oh, yeah, they already got sued. They're already sued.
That's their problem. But the truth is, I've worked with 6 different publishers in my life. They're all great. Berkeley, Putnam, Warner, Simon & Schuster. But the truth is, publishing is dying. They know it. I know it. And I've been very successful at it. People are not reading novels. They're not reading books. So this man, Mr. Wolf, is at the end of a death knell. He himself is dying. He just goes around to promote himself. Look at him, in a thick, kind of gargoyle type of individual who has no understanding of.
Yeah, I mean, he even admits it. I mean, he even admits it, Steve. I mean, the Business Insider puts out the story. The author of the explosive new Trump book says he can't be sure if parts of it are true. I mean, so he's admitting that the whole thing is fabricated to begin with. I mean, that proves everything you just said. But, you know, just real quick, we're about to go to break. Honestly, the only sign that I see that Trump is crazy is that he's not suing these people. I would have been suing these people for all the slanderous and all the libel that they've been perpetuating against Trump for the last year. That's the only thing to me that shows Trump crazy. He hasn't sued him yet.
No, it's not even that. What he's doing is jerking their chain, and they don't understand how he can manipulate people, and that's exactly what he's doing. And he creates a lot of distraction with Twitter, and he purposely does that.
Oh, yeah.
So that our people, and John Kelly, General Davis, General Jim Mattis can do it, and we can finish the wars in Syria, be able to quiet down North Korea. Nobody's talked about that. That was the result of Trump. North Korea is going to be involved in South Korean Olympics. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about the fact that Iran is disturbed and the young youth are there. That was Trump who basically initiated. Nobody's talking about the fact that Pakistan should never receive our aid because it's a failed state. I have worked with what's her name, Benazir Bhutto. I've worked with her husband. I've worked with the generals of the country, Yaqub Khan and others, the head of the Islamic fundamentalists, Galani. It's a failed state. It has never been a good ally of ours. It will never be a good ally, and we should support India. Let China take over Pakistan. We will work with India, and India will take care of Pakistan. And that's what will happen. Pakistan has failed. It's a disaster, and we don't want any more Pakistanis in America.
You mean the Indian nation that they gave to the Muslims, Pakistan, didn't work out, huh? Shocking. Right. Okay. Well, I think it's amazing. A genius thought nugget from Steve Pieczenik here today. Malpractice lawsuits against these psychiatrists that are making these unfounded claims about President Trump on air. It's brilliant. Steve Pieczenik is behind the thought nugget genius. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
The War Room. INFOWARS.com/show.